Los padres habrán estado comprando todos los
Better get it
libros.
right on the timing.
Los
It's a little bit
padres
hard.
habrán estado comprando todos los libros. Me encanta un montón. Me encanta un montón.
What does science actually say works best when it comes to improving your listening skills in Spanish?
Science-based language learning has gone too far. Last week, that video popped up on my feed and I instantly knew I wouldn't like it. Maybe it was because the title, The Smartest Way to Learn Fast Spanish, or it could be the length, 20 minutes, because to me, I feel like I could explain how to understand fast Spanish fast. My name's Nick, I'm fluent in Spanish, and I learned how to speak Spanish like your dad cooks a brisket, low and slow. I believe the only way to become fluent in a language is to take in massive amounts of authentic content in that language at a level you understand. Or in other words, if you want to understand someone speaking a language fast, you need to practice listening to someone speaking a language fast. Shocking, I know. Language learning to me is like building a muscle, progressive overload. When you go to the gym, you don't start with the super heavy weights. You start with the weights you can lift, and every day you slowly get better and better and better until you're lifting heavy weights. Or in language learning terms, you start with easy, slow content, and every week, every month, you crank up the difficulty a little bit more until eventually you arrive at understanding native content. Mr. Real Fast Spanish disagrees with me because of science, and here's his exact words.
You have to learn to understand Spanish natives speaking at their natural pace. I'm not going to tell you to do things like listen to a lot of Spanish, listen to Spanish that is at your level, or look for comprehensible input, because that's not what you need. What you need is to understand the science.
And this is exactly the kind of premise that leads people to doing weird metronome exercises to get fluent in a language. He's not just saying, well, you should listen to Spanish, but also here's some exercises that could help you. No, he explicitly says you don't need to listen to Spanish. You just need to do these exercises and understand the science. I personally don't think we need to actually dive that far into this claim to already see a huge problem. And that's that all of us have already learned a language, our native language, and yet none of us really understand the science of language learning or our native languages. My Argentinian girlfriend went to a traditional language class, and in 1 week's time, she came back to the house knowing more English grammar than I did. I also learned how to water ski without understanding water physics. I learned how to play guitar without understanding sound acoustics. To this day, I really have no idea how guitars actually make sound, yet I was a guitar teacher. The idea that you have to rationally understand the how of something before you can do the thing, to me, just goes against all of my experience learning how to do things on this earth. So diving into this video, what is the deal with the metronome? Why are we doing that? Because of studies, and that's gonna be the recurring theme of the video. He knows the best exercises to help you learn Spanish because of studies. But if you actually look at the studies he's putting on the screen, it's a bit of smoke and mirrors. He gives 2 studies to support the idea that the way you understand fast Spanish is by speaking with a metronome. We get 1 study of 32 English to Farsi translators and another study of 60 people trying to learn Spanish and speak it more naturally. First of all, don't these sheer numbers kind of just underwhelm you? Between these 2 studies, we're only talking about 92 people. In the Spanish group, that's just 4 groups of 13 people doing different methods. I feel like when you watch that video, what you're expecting is, oh, all those studies have tons of people, 500 people, 600 people, 1,000 people. But no, these studies are actually really tiny. And that's supposed to be representative of the science. But then if you go to r/Dreaming Spanish and you just read through the sub, you can find 100, 200, 300 testimonials of people saying, I learned Spanish just by doing input. You can't ignore that huge size discrepancy. Even if these studies proved what we expect them to prove when we watch the video, the data would still be a drop in the pond just compared to the sheer number of input-based testimonials we have floating around on the internet. Even if half of those testimonials were just invalid for various reasons, it would still be overwhelming compared to the numbers in these studies. The first study, which I'm calling the Persian Translator Study, was testing translators who could already fluently listen and interpret from Farsi to English simultaneously. So these are expert-level language learners. The study found that teaching these people about word stress in languages helped them translate. And I actually have no trouble believing that. I'm not saying that understanding a language's rhythm wouldn't help a translator. I personally have no idea. What I am saying is I don't see how this proves that a normal person should ditch listening to Spanish and start speaking with a metronome. Also, in this study, nobody actually did that metronome exercise. They just got explicit instruction about rhythm. So this study isn't really relevant to the actual exercise he's promoting, and he kind of says that in the video. But the other study, the more relevant study, is also a bit silly, because in the beginning of the video, he's pitting listening practice against rhythm training. And in the second study, we do have the metronome exercise, but it's never actually pitted against listening practice. There were 4 groups of 13 people in the study. The first group was the musical training, metronome, jellyfish jam group. The second group did grammar and pronunciation drills, which isn't listening practice. The third group did shadowing, which is kind of listening practice, but not really. And the final group just did nothing. You would have expected that if this video was about rhythm training, syllable counting, shadowing, all being better than just listening to Spanish, that you would have pitted listening to Spanish against those things. But you don't. The other thing that kind of jumps out to you when you read these studies is they're not about understanding fast Spanish. The Persian translator study is about understanding fast English, and that could generalize to all languages, including Spanish. But either way, nowhere in the study is it saying you actually don't have to listen to the language you want to learn. You can just do explicit rhythm instruction. The explicit rhythm instruction was 20 minutes of a 90-minute traditional language class. So you still did a 70-minute traditional language class and 20 minutes of rhythm instruction, and those people were better than the people who did the 90-minute traditional class. But nowhere is it saying, oh, don't listen to the language, just do explicit rhythm instruction. And even if it was, as I said before, these are expert level translators. Maybe there's a difference between a general population and what people who can literally hear a language and translate it on the fly are doing. That's a whole nother level of language learning. To say that what works for those people generalizes to the entire population is a stretch, in my opinion. For example, a grandmaster in chess is gonna hone his skills in a very different way than a person who's just learning chess will. And that second study that proposes the metronome wasn't actually testing if the participants could understand fast Spanish. It was testing if their production of Spanish was more natural. But that's not even what we're talking about. We're supposed to be talking about how to understand faster Spanish, but nowhere in the results of the study is it saying their comprehension got better. It's saying they were able to speak more natural Spanish, allegedly. So we kind of get baited and switched because we're told that this exercise scientifically is proven to help you understand fast Spanish, but the 2 studies he puts on the screen don't actually conclude that. So my problem with this metronome exercise just comes down to my mental model of how to learn a language. I see that metronome exercise as output, and I believe that languages are acquired through input. So anything that's not input, anything that's not coming to you from an external source, I don't think is gonna actually help you learn a language. It might sharpen your skills, it could help you around the edges, I don't wanna dispute that, but I don't think that's the breadth of where you should be spending your time trying to learn a language. Where you should be spending most of your energy is just consuming the language. But aside from the philosophical difference, I just find this exercise so counterintuitive because all of us speak Spanish poorly. 99% of second language learners have accents, right? We have accents. Almost none of us have near native level fluency where we speak exactly like a native speaker. All of us have the accent quirks that come from our native language. And that's totally normal. And that's especially true in the beginning, where a lot of people are probably like, oh yeah, I'm speaking Spanish fine, this sounds fine. But to people who have spent so long listening to Spanish, when we hear those accents of beginners, we're like, you got some time left in the oven. And if you're spending 20 minutes a day talking to yourself in Spanish, what you're really doing, in my opinion, is cementing your pronunciation. And you'd think if you want to actually understand fast Spanish, you would listen to real native speakers speaking fast Spanish, because they're not going to sound like you because you're speaking the language a bit incorrectly. You just don't have the perfect muscle movements in your mouth that someone would have if they've been speaking Spanish their entire lives. So why are you listening to yourself speak Spanish? Why wouldn't you just play like a native speaker with a metronome at least? I'm editing this video right now and I'm literally still crashing out about this. I just can't figure out why you wouldn't just play a native speaker speaking. Why do you have to be the one to speak? I'm so confused. Maybe I'm just not enlightened enough to understand this, but someone please explain to me why you just can't listen to a native speaker. If you listen to yourself speak the language that you're not that good at speaking, how is that gonna help you get any better at listening to people who can actually speak the language? Why wouldn't you just listen to the people who can speak the language? I don't know. I'm too much of a peasant to understand this. It doesn't register with me. You know how people say, if your friend jumped off a bridge, would you jump off the bridge as well? That's exactly how I feel when people suggest exercises like this. No matter if a study did allegedly prove that talking to yourself with a metronome is actually better than just taking in Spanish content, there's just no way I would believe that. It would be like if a study came out that said, actually, you understand Spanish content better when you're standing on one foot. I'm not gonna start standing on one foot when I'm listening to Spanish content. It just seems nonsensical. It goes against my common sense. And he repeats the same idea when he goes into how to do exercises to start understanding connected speech in Spanish. Now, if you don't know what connected speech is, the way spoken Spanish naturally flows, words aren't pronounced in isolation. They blend together. The ends of words cram to the beginnings of words, and that can create pronunciations that you wouldn't expect if you're just reading the words on paper. And the example I heard to demonstrate this was the phrase, ¿qué es esto? ¿Qué es esto? I'm saying ¿qué es esto in Spanish, but it kind of all sounds like it blends together. Maybe when you hear it, if you don't speak Spanish or you're a beginner, you might hear two words. When I say ¿qué es esto? You might hear ¿qué es esto? ¿Qué es esto? But I'm saying ¿qué es esto? ¿Qué es esto? Now, personally, I think knowing this explicitly is helpful. So I'm not like Pablo from Dreaming Spanish who's saying, you know, everything you learn should be implicit. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. What I am saying is if you want to practice connected speech, what I wouldn't do is speak myself. I would just listen to connected speech.
Me encanta un montón. Me encanta un montón.
Why do we have to listen to our own shitty accents whenever we want to try to understand Spanish? It doesn't make sense. We're not speaking Spanish in the most authentic way. Would you rather hear 100 Americans speaking Spanish as a second language to help you understand connected speech? Or would you rather hear a person who just naturally uses connected speech use connected speech? And of course, I'm really biased because connected speech just sounds like normal speech to me because I've literally listened to almost 1,000 hours of Spanish. And in my time listening to 1,000 hours of Spanish, I've heard connected speech and it just sounds normal now. That ¿qué es esto? Thing that I got was from Miguel from Spanish Input, a YouTube channel that I recommend. And he was the one who introduced me to this concept of connected speech. And when he first said ¿qué es esto? I heard the two words ¿qué es esto? I didn't understand. But then, over time, not with explicit instruction, but just listening to connected speech, I eventually started hearing ¿qué es esto? Whenever I heard connected speech. And it wasn't like I needed to practice it, it just happened naturally. So I saw how many views this video had, and I was like, how the hell do so many people think this is how you learn a language? But then I read the comments and I realized, okay, this kind of makes sense, because a lot of the people in the comments are just native Spanish speakers who speak English, and they kind of just want to know how Spanish sounds to foreigners. So they're not taking this as an actual instruction guide, they're watching it for entertainment. And the other type of comment you see are these people who are like, oh, I've tried to learn Spanish 100 times and I can't do it, this video helped me. And that's exactly what we would expect to happen to you if you tried to learn Spanish by speaking Spanish to a metronome when you're a beginner. You'll try it, your brain will reject it because of how unintuitive it is, and you'll be repeating me encanta every day after state-sponsored lunch in an insane asylum upstate. That first study we looked at, again, it was for translators. It was for people who are no less than C1 in the language. To give Mr. Real Fast Spanish the benefit of the doubt, you could say, okay, well, he's actually targeting expert level language learners. But that's just not how it reads to me, and it's not how it's reading to people in the comment section. To me, the video comes off more like, are you a Spanish learner who just can't understand fast Spanish yet? Try this hack. But there is no hack that's gonna take you from a beginner level in Spanish and just skyrocket you to be able to understand native content. Just like there's no hack to go from benching 135 at the gym to benching 225. It just takes time and consistency. It takes input in both cases. The input in language learning is input from the language you're trying to learn. And the input in the gym is the total volume of the weight you lift every day. In conclusion, I'm just a guy who got fluent in Spanish. I didn't get a degree in Spanish or language learning. I don't spend my days perusing the latest academic journals. It could be that I got fluent in Spanish all wrong, and I could have just saved a year and a half watching this guy's channel. That could be true. But here's how I honestly feel. You don't need to read a bunch of studies or understand the bits per second of the information encoded in a language to begin to understand it. I think this academic aesthetic, where you just continuously quote studies, makes people feel like language learners are some kind of special breed of geniuses. But in reality, all of the people I know who are bilingual are just normal people who spent the time listening to the language and being consistent with it every day. And if that's how you feel, and you're really trying to lock into your language learning journey this year and acquire your target language, I recommend you visit my site Lengualytics, where I pool together all of the best comprehensible input content from all over the internet at all levels. And the site automatically tracks your progress, so you can get a visual representation of your comprehension growing day by day, week by week, month by month. If you're interested in joining a growing group of language learners to help keep you accountable and help keep you consistent. Check it out. You'll love it. Language learning is a long journey, and you can do it with time, effort, consistency, and all those things.
Cheswick, you're voluntary?
Mm-hmm.